what's your perspective of why we're talking about being human? Like what happened in the world? What has generated this awakening, whatever you call it? Like, what is your perspective of why everyone's saying this?
So one, I think again, buzzword, 100% a buzzword. Not everyone means that everyone wants to like say they're doing this thing, but not really do this thing. On the flip side, for me, I'm hiring humans, and no matter how you spin it from a financial or corporate standpoint, your human capital is your most expensive capital. So it pays to be invested in them, to understand how they operate, how they think, how they learn. People make their decision to stay at a company long term in their first 2 weeks, which is still typically and should be your onboarding process. So in my brain, if you've had a terrible onboarding process, I'm already thinking about getting my resume together at 6 months, and I'm just going to make it to that 12-month mark and start putting my resume in. And now you're literally opening up the window and throwing out money because it costs so much to onboard people. You're just taking it and tossing it. So even if you think about it from a financial standpoint rather than an ethical one, it still makes sense. But from an ethical standpoint, our responsibility as leaders and as organizations is to make people better. People feel better when they feel valued and they're coming to work for someone else's dream at the end of the day. So the least we can do is better prepare them for whatever is coming next. I'm very open about exits and terminations. I'm not negative about them, despite them being pretty taboo. I'm always going to celebrate people who want better for themselves. I'm not a believer in like company loyalty, because at the end of the day, like they're not going to be loyal to me if they need to do a round of layoffs or if they need to do a round of firing. Like they're not going to be loyal to me. But what I do respect is people who are advocating for themselves to do better, to be better. And I want to make sure that as a leader that I am giving them all of the tools to do that. And so from an ethical standpoint, I think that's what people deserve. And so in order to do that, we also have to offer them psychological safety, which means valuing them as a full 180 human, not just as this like corporate robot that takes off their human sweater at 8 a.m. and puts it back on at 5 p.m. You don't like check your trauma at the door. So whether it be you're going through a death or a divorce or you live with an abuser, like none of that stops at 8 a.m. The only thing that stops is your ability to acknowledge it. And I don't think that's fair.
Oh gosh. And so many women need to hear that. Like, what does it mean? I mean, men need to hear it too, but women specifically, like, how do you stand up and realize that it's your responsibility to lead the life you are leading, and it's no one else's to tell you what to do? And so one of the things I want to go deeper on with you is something you said a moment ago about identifying the full 180 human. For my first question is why you say 180 instead of 360. But then my second question is talk to me about what your opinion is about happening in that space, like showing up as a whole human at work, why it's happening, and what are the ramifications to businesses? Like, why does it matter?
For sure. And so I think that this is actually the other misconception I talk about is when we talk about authenticity, again, people think it's a blanket statement, when in actuality, authenticity means I get to bring whatever I want. And that is going to look very different from me to another person and to another person. I'm very open about my queerness, my relationships, my Blackness. And there are going to be people who identify just like me who aren't nearly as loud as me. And that's okay too. And so I think that's the thing for companies is they lose control over dictating how people show up. Because there's no guideline, there's no cookie cutter that we're all supposed to fit into anymore. There's no guidebook. And so companies don't like to loosen the reins when they don't have the actual control anymore. And so as a Black woman, you're taught from a very early age, due to society, due to how we're perceived in the media, that you have to straighten your hair. Your hair has to be a normal color. You got to take those piercings out of your face. You have to change your voice and sound less aggressive in order to be successful. We're taught that there's this like secret sauce to be successful, as if it's like this equation that's like A plus B and C is the outcome. But we can see that's not reality. If you look at some of the Black people who are killed on the news, they're people who did A plus B plus C and they still ended up dead at the hands of people who our taxes pay them. And so for me, I learned how many people code switch on a day-to-day basis. And when you're so wrapped up in trying to be someone else and sound like someone else and laugh harder and smile more, that's like 50% of your day. You are spending 50% of your energy being someone else and 50% doing your job. And if companies want actual productivity, they need to let people be productive as is, as they came, as who they are, because the other stuff doesn't really matter. The stuff that matters is, are we good people? Are you a good human? Are you a good teammate? Are you a good leader? It doesn't matter if you're Black, white, Asian, gay, straight, Muslim, Christian. Those are things that make you who you are, and they're inherently good things. They shouldn't be seen as negatives or taboo or make people uncomfortable. And when they do make you uncomfortable, that is your job to unpack. And I say that all of the time. And I think that's the piece that people can't get their mind around, is that when I am uncomfortable, I can't ask you to alter your identity, because identities aren't opinions.
Oof.
They're,
Ooh.
they're solid. They're
Ooh.
concrete. They're not like debatable. People's validity is not dependent on your uncomfortableness. And so I think that's the harder piece for companies to wrap their mind around, is knowing that we have to be vulnerable enough to check ourselves. And a lot of people do not want to check themselves, unfortunately.
Gosh, I would drop my mic if I could, but it's attached to this really fancy structure.